Iowa, the Hawkeye State, or as some know it, the place where the tall corn grows. But there's another side of Iowa, a part often not seen and only heard about in bits and pieces, woven together through campfire stories, passed down through generations, and adding to the mystery and lore of what some would call paranormal. The supernatural, disrupted spirits, stories of ghosts and hauntings, cryptids, UFO sightings, and alien encounters. Stories of the unexplained and unimaginable, but stories nonetheless, simply exist and lurk in the shadows of the 29th state. This is Iowa Shadow Files. Hello and welcome to Iowa Shadow Files Season 1, Episode 3. I'm Dan, your host and Iowa Paranormal Storyteller, and today we dive back into the world of cryptids and giving you case number 2 of a short series we are calling Bigfoot in Iowa. And today we're going to be focusing on an area in northeast Iowa known as the Yellow River State Forest and the connections it may have with Bigfoot. Let's get into it. If you hadn't had a chance to listen to part 1 in the Bigfoot in Iowa series, you might want to go back, give it a listen. We start diving into some of the odd things that have happened specifically in the case centering around Bigfoot. In 1978, there was a huge outbreak of Bigfoot sightings surrounding the community of Odison. And I pause here for a moment because growing up in northwest Iowa, you'd think I'd get the pronunciation right. And I was going to go back and forth, Odison, Ottoson. So if I slaughtered it, forgive me, because the good news is this. We know the area is technically in Kossuth County and very close to Humboldt County. And the story itself and the sightings, was so well known that it was documented in the Des Moines Register at the time. But today, we look at the Yellow River State Forest. And for much the same reasons, it garnered attention because of a show on Animal Planet called Finding Bigfoot. It puts a spotlight on the area, and let's go ahead and take a look at that area now. The Yellow River State Forest came into existence in 1935 when land was purchased for the forest. And the same was appropriate because the land was adjacent to the Yellow River. A little over a decade later, in 1949, about 1,500 acres of the forest was allocated to the Effigy Mounds National Monument, and today, the forest stands at 8,503 acres in size approximately. It's a sizable forest for the state of Iowa, which is primarily farmland and has quickly become a popular recreational area for hiking and camping. But somewhere in the shadows of the forest lies the possibility of something else. Mysterious sounds have filled the forest at night, and the stories of things seen and rumors of a creature stalking through the trees have given cause for investigation by the BFRO Iowa chapter. And the word from their camp is that there are signs of Bigfoot in the Yellow River State Forest. Now, we'll return about more stories of the county and the forest that resides in it, which is Allamakee County in Iowa. It has to be one of the most beautiful counties in the Midwest, not just Iowa. And if you've ever driven some of the back roads or along the Great Mississippi River Road, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. In fact, I have some folks who claim that some of those views and some of those roads are more beautiful than the Rockies. Now, this is a matter of opinion, I get it, but it just goes to show just how rugged and wild the terrain is in the area, and land that is perfect for a Bigfoot to live. So let's take a closer look at this. But before we do, we want to return to this particular story and later shows, and I hope to have an interview with a member of the Iowa chapter of the BFRO, which is the Bigfoot Research Organization, for those who are unfamiliar, and if I'm lucky, I would hope to get an interview with the podcast Bigfoot Society. So if he's listening, I know it's a long shot, but if he is, I would love to get an interview so we can dive a lot deeper into the subject matter. But taking a look at the Yellow River area in today's episode makes a ton of sense. Though it's not a common thing to think or link Bigfoot with Iowa, especially when you think of the flat areas of the state. mostly covered with corn and soybean and fields. When you get closer to the river areas, mainly the Missouri River on the west side of the state and the Mississippi River on the east side of the state, you have these larger pockets of heavily forested areas, rich in vegetation, tree cover, plus a food and water source for survival. And it becomes an area of refuge for something like Bigfoot. This could ideally be home for the creature, and the mighty Missouri and Mississippi rivers aren't the only rivers that could host a Sasquatch. You have other rivers such as the Des Moines River, the Skunk River, the Raccoon River, and a few others. So it's not a huge surprise that sightings would come from Iowa. The Yellow River State Forest is no exception, as it would provide precisely the type of habitat that Bigfoot prefers, and that leads us to the Animal Planet show, Finding Bigfoot, which aired in search of the mighty Sasquatch back in 2017. I have two thoughts on this. First off, the show itself seemed mysterious. There was this element of wonder when the crew started searching for Bigfoot. And the other side was a little, as I look at it, production-y, if that's even a word. It was overproduced, I thought. Maybe that's more the word I was looking for here. But the crew thought, when they were doing this show, they thought they spotted something in the distance using night vision equipment. They went to investigate, and one of the crew members forgot to communicate with the team opposite of the area that they were moving in that general direction and supposedly spooked a possible Sasquatch. It could have been, but it also could have been just a dramatization to keep viewers hooked. However, it doesn't replace the evidence that the BFRO had gathered, everything from knocks, verbalization, cues, or anything more. They got all this stuff and got all the attention that it got the attention of Animal Planet to begin with, and giving it the nickname, the Iowa Bigfoot Sighting Capital. In other words, the Yellow River State Forest is a Bigfoot haven. Then you have the flip side. Roger Bublitz, who was employed at Yellow River State Forest for well over 30 years, thinks it doesn't exist and has never encountered it or seen any evidence such as footprints to prove of its existence. He admits this, that he's found evidence of mountain lions and evidence of black bears, but no Bigfoot. No pictures, nothing on trail cams, and it's hard to say it's a Sasquatch without the hard evidence. But then, you get other reports of loud knocking sounds from the trees in the distance, almost like someone is hitting the trees as a form of Morse code to warn others of intruders approaching. Or is it just a woodpecker? A really, really loud and big woodpecker, I might add. Then there is an encounter rumored through the eyes of two teenagers hiking the forest together for the first time. As they ventured further into the forest, they came upon a set of huge footprints. And they were obvious humanoid prints. But they were bewildered because they were much too large to be human. And yet somehow something or someone had made these prints. So they pressed on. And as they went a little further down the trail, in a sunlit clearing stood a creature. They were shocked, as this tall, thick with hair, upright creature stood there and looked right at them, standing still like a statue. And in the next instant, it let out a howl, echoing through the forest. The two teens stood frozen with fear, but with a sudden burst of adrenaline, turned and ran back down the trail away from whatever it was. Presumably, a Bigfoot? It didn't chase them. However, when they made it back to their parked car in safety, they drove silently back home, shocked at the encounter and what they had just witnessed with their own eyes. Now, I have a couple questions with this one. First is this. The story shared never shared their names. It also goes complete opposite of what was happening with Roger Bublitz, who had shared when he had been working in the forest for over 30 years, that he had never encountered any pictures. He had never encountered any footprints. And yet, these two teens on their very first visit run into a set of tracks. Tracks, mind you, that will remain there for a little while at least. And the question that ponders in my mind is this. Why didn't they come out to the park rangers and ask questions? Tell them of their experience and then back it up by showing the rangers, hey, look, footprints, because it's evidence. And secondary to all of this, I have questions about running into a set of huge prints and being a pair of teenagers setting off down the bunny trail to follow the tracks. You would think, and I could be wrong on this, but you would think alarm bells would be going off in their heads. Something is off. Something is not right here. Stop for a second. These tracks and footprints are not normal. But they didn't. So on this one, the skeptic in me comes out a little more, and I only share this story as a contrast because we have both sides here. We have camp number one, who emphatically believe in the existence of Bigfoot. But we have camp number two that are the complete opposite and simply want proof. Where's the body? Where are the bones of a deceased Bigfoot? Where are the pictures? Why haven't we captured just one of them? Over years and years of stories and legends of the Sasquatch, not one. But it doesn't mean we don't explore. It doesn't mean we don't listen to someone who has a story, has a personal experience, and to them, it's very real. And with that, just to put this disclaimer out, Iowa Shadow Files presses on to at least share the stories because, honestly, we don't know. Yes, investigating and hunting for more information and data surrounding the paranormal is a pseudoscience, but it's an attempt. It's a try. Try, and if you fail, try again. It's that kind of type of science, but the world is full of mysteries and unknown, whether legend or fact. So we continue to tell the story. More on Bigfoot in Iowa right after this. Hi there, Dan here from Iowa Shadow Files. I want to personally thank you for coming by and listening. Consider following along. You can listen on any of the platforms you choose to listen to on your podcast. Since we look at Iowa Shadow Files as a big community, we want to offer you a chance to reach out if you have a story or experience to share. A place you would like us to consider covering if we haven't covered it yet, or simply just to say hello. We're grateful, and even though we know that there are more places, more stories, more questions, we also know that the truth is still out there. So let's get back to the story. Okay, so we know that the Yellow River State Forest gained a lot of attention from the Animal Planet show, Finding Bigfoot. But it makes a ton of sense with the type of habitat it would provide for a Sasquatch. Coverage with the trees, a water source, a food source, and in some ways a Sasquatch paradise. Or some have called it the Iowa Bigfoot capital. But it's not the only state forest that shares the story of Bigfoot. So let's get into a couple more. You have Stevens State Forest, Iowa's largest state forest, totaling over 15,500 acres. And it records some of its own stories of groups researching the area and recording vocalization sounds, loud knocking sounds in responsive fashion. Then we have a story from Shimek State Forest. This is a local story from a turkey hunter who was near the state forest hunting on private land. He was about to shoot at several turkeys when he heard a strange noise. As it grew louder, he realized that whatever it was headed his direction. And he wasn't the only one who heard the approach of whatever it was. The turkeys were spooked by the noise and the movement of something approaching, lowered to the ground, and they ran the opposite direction for cover. As the sound came closer, he grew alarmed at what he saw. A creature that he first thought looked like another hunter dressed in a ghillie suit. But as he looked closer, it was an unrecognizable creature that stood over 6 feet tall, had broad shoulders, long arms covered in hair that was dark gray and dirty, and had a terrible odor. It walked upright on 2 legs, suddenly stopped, turned its head, and looked directly at the hunter. Fearing for its life, he clicked off the safety to shoot, and the creature suddenly dropped into a crouching position. And upon the hunter shifting his hand on the gun, it bolted into the forest and out of sight. And it's not just state forest branding Bigfoot stories, but state parks as well. Probably the most notable one was in Woodbury County on the outskirts of Sioux City, Iowa. Stone State Park has a story from 1971. There was a group of young men driving into a park when they spotted an outline of a large man on top of the hill outlined by the moonlit sky. Naturally, they were intrigued. They wanted to know who or what was on the hill, and they stood there observing from a distance. One of the young men beat his chest and made a loud Tarzan-like scream. And this is where the interaction takes a turn. The creature suddenly moved towards them, crashing through the trees as it approached quickly, which naturally scared the young men back into their car. As they started their mad dash away from the scene, there was a large group of rabbits, squirrels, birds, and other animals that poured out of the woods, running away from something. In a panic, they sped off down the road, and one of the guys recalls looking back and seeing a tall, dark form come out of the trees where they once stood, barely escaping the creature. Was it a Bigfoot? Or was it just a figment of their imagination? And then you have the story of Backbone State Park in Delaware County. They have a story reported by the BFRO where a woman witnessed that she described as a Bigfoot walking across the field and into the park. It was 1979, and the report shares that the woman had reported hearing loud, strange screams at night and sounds closer to a howl. For several nights, she grew concerned because the noises were scaring their horses. She reported the incident to the park ranger, who told her that she probably saw a bear, which she was confident that it was not a bear because it was walking on two legs and stepped over a fence. Once again, was it a Bigfoot or something else? Was it a bear? Was it a dog? Whatever the case may be, we hear the skeptics and the believers alike. And what about Ledges State Park? Yes, if you're familiar with Iowa, or even if you aren't familiar with Iowa, Ledges is a beautiful state park found just south of Boone, Iowa, and naturally, Boone County. Here is what the Iowa DNR site had to say about Ledges, just to give you an idea. With its distinctive geological features, breathtaking views, and vibrant history, Ledges State Park is a nature lover's paradise. One of the very first state parks in Iowa, Ledges has been a must-see Iowa attraction for decades. Sandstone ledges rise nearly 100 feet above the floor of the stream bed. The sandstone was deposited 300 million years ago following the retreat of the shallow sea that covered much of the Midwest. About 13,000 years ago, glacial meltwater began to cut down through the sandstone, forming the park's dramatic cliffs and valleys, with over 4 miles worth of hiking trails. And there were stories about signs of Bigfoot in Ledges State Park. Stories that I want to save for a future interview on this area, but looking at the scenery around Ledges, it's a typical area where Bigfoot would like to hang out. A place that has a water source, a food source, a place that has forests and trees, basic cover for living and hiding. Rocky cliffs, gullies, and more overlooking a river. This isn't new. But what do you think? Is it real? Are there Bigfoot in Iowa, or is it just simply made up? Like the first episode where we brought up the possibility of a hoax. Is it just someone in an ape suit making a joke? Or are we facing something that is much, much bigger? Because we know one thing. This is a cryptid that isn't new. It isn't unique to just Iowa, and all you have to do is visit the BFRO website and read encounter after encounter from different states, including Iowa, which has well over 75 documented sightings, by the way. And these were just the documented ones. How many more exist worldwide, where people are simply too scared to come forward, scared that they'll be called crazy, made fun of, bullied? So there are more. And even if 99% of the stories were fabricated or fiction, even if only 1% of the stories had merit, isn't that 1% enough to make you stop and say, this is very strange indeed? More on Bigfoot and Yellow River State Forest after this. Hi there, Dan here with Iowa Shadow Files. We're new here, but not entirely new to podcasting. We formerly came from Midwest Ghost Town, another podcast. But with that being said, we forge ahead counting and telling stories of the paranormal in Iowa. We want you to feel a part of the community. Consider subscribing and following along. You can catch episodes wherever you listen to your podcast, whether Spotify or Apple Podcast, even over at YouTube. And yes, we know it could be a little boring with just the screen and a little wave going through the screen on YouTube, but occasionally we'll drop a raw video or two. Meanwhile, we'd love to hear from you. If you have a story to share, or even if you want to just drop by and say hi, we'd love to hear from you. You can reach us at iowashadowfiles@gmail.com. That's iowashadowfiles@gmail.com. Right now, let's get back to the story. The Yellow River State Forest lies in a very unique area in the Midwest. It's technically known as the Driftless region, and it encompasses way more than just Iowa, crossing the Mississippi River into Wisconsin, parts of Illinois, and Minnesota. And while we focus on the stories of Iowa on this podcast, it's important to note that some of the stories in the region cross state boundaries. And in this case of Northeast Iowa, they certainly cross over county boundaries. Over in Clayton County, there's another story noted by the BFRO that happened back in the fall of 1970 here in Clayton County in Iowa. It was an older report, but came out after the couple started hearing more stories about Bigfoot in the region, and they decided it was time to come forward. The couple shared that they were out hiking in the area to enjoy the changing leaves, and they were a little further away from Yellow River area and along Pikes Peak State Park area instead. This area is located over a bluff overlooking the Mississippi, and as they approached the overlook of the river, the couple suddenly heard a loud thumping noise. Catching the couple off guard, they simply noticed the sound seemed close and could not only hear the loud thumps, but they could feel them as well, which made them believe it was loud footsteps, and something was approaching. Suddenly, a loud scream echoed off the trees, a sound they had never heard before, something that clearly was not an animal. Hearing the loud scream scared the couple away from the approaching noise and back down the trail, where they ran as fast as they could back to the ranger station, where they reported their encounter. The rangers responded that they had no idea what it could be, and that nothing similar had ever been reported. Apparently a first for the area. The BFRO went on to add that the noises they heard were not from a bear or a coyote based on experience, but to add to the shared report that numerous similar encounters and sightings of Sasquatch in the area have been told, but oftentimes asked not to be published by the witnesses. This seems to be a common occurrence with sharing paranormal stories, by the way. It makes sense from people scared of the criticism, scared to be made fun of, laughed at, and more. But in this particular case, there is another story shared just a few months before this one was reported. Back in 1970, a large creature which was described as brown and very tall was observed running across the road and down into a ditch, where it proceeded to jump over a fence and dash into a nearby cornfield. Prints were later found. And to add to the witness account was the story of a foul smell that accompanied the area where the beast was sighted. And the interesting part to the story was the story of nearby residents adding that the creature was not new to the area and had in fact lived among them for over 100 years, mutilating cattle and sheep. Story after story can be read, especially in the Driftless region. We started with the Yellow River State Forest, and then more accounts can surely be shared in the state forest. We shared a few more stories based around state parks and state forest, and we shared stories connected to the region that is adjacent in different counties. These stories certainly make a person say, what if? What do you think? Do we have Bigfoot in Iowa? Or is it something entirely different? Possibly something not from this world. We have one more episode of this mini-series, Bigfoot in Iowa, that we will dive into next week. One more. But it won't be the last of touching on Bigfoot in Iowa, because we know we have more stories. We know we have more experiences and interviews with more experienced Bigfoot researchers out there. And those are to come in part 3 of this mini-series. I hope you come back to listen, as next week we tell a different story of a well-documented Bigfoot encounter called the Lockridge Monster. We know there are more places, more stories, more questions, but we also know the truth is still out there. This is Iowa Shadow Files.